everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in a series of webinars on teaching at the right level. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Many of you will be familiar with the format from the last webinars, but for those of you who are new, this is the third webinar in a 7-part series which looks at the key components of Pratham Pioneer Teaching at the Right Level approach. My name is Ashley and I'm the Policy Manager at JPEL, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's presentations will talk about monitoring and mentoring from experience and research from both teaching at the right level interventions as well as studies, other studies and programs. JPEL affiliated professors have found that strong monitoring and mentoring and dedicated time for teachers delivering teaching at the right level is key to ensuring that teaching at the right level takes place in the classroom and maintains impact. So this webinar will explore what we know about the role of monitors and mentors in teaching at the right level programs, what we know about the effects of coaching more generally, and ways to create a culture of data-driven action. Today we are very, very lucky to have Devyani Prasad, Head of Program Management from Pratham, Benjamin Piper, a Senior Director at RTI, and Hanno Kemp, the Program Director at Fuel, presenting for us. Before we dive into the presentations, I'd like to go through a few guidelines for the webinar. So to note that the presentations will take half an hour and each presenter will talk for approximately 10 minutes. After the presentations, we will have approximately half an hour for questions. Thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance. We have selected some of these questions for the Q&A session. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter these into the chat box, and if we have time, we will direct these to the presenters during the Q&A session. So without wasting any more time, could we please have Devyani to present on the roles of mentors and monitors in teaching at the right level programs.
Thank you, Ashley. And Radhika, I'm going to ask you to move the slides as we move ahead. You could go to my first quick recap slide, which talks about what we have learned so far. So for those of you who are attending the first in the series of webinars, I'd like to begin by quickly going over what really has teaching at the right level taught us over the past several years that Pratham has been experimenting with this approach here in India and now expanding to other geographies as well. So the first and most important lesson that we have learned for teaching at the right level is that children who are above a certain age, in most of our experiments who are 8 and older and have been in school for a few years, can pick up quickly. So what does that mean? That means that if we start teaching at the level of the child, we are really teaching at the child's right level. In the scenario where children are over the age of 8 and above, teaching at the right level has shown us that children can make progress quickly and make progress in very tangible skills, that is reading, writing and arithmetic. Reading also with understanding and expression. And we believe these are the foundational building blocks that help a child to move forward. However, how do we make this possible? Intensive and effective strategies are needed to help these children catch up in a short period of time. At Pratham here in India, we have been trying exactly this. How do we help children in a short period of time pick up, advance quickly, at least build these foundational skills by using the approach that is known today as teaching at the right level? I'm sorry you cannot see the slides, but it seems that Radhika has dropped off the call, so I'm just going to talk you through some of our key elements because I don't have access to the screen. So what are some of the key elements of teaching at the right level? The first is that the process begins with a simple one-on-one assessment. Here in India, we have been focusing our efforts using teaching at the right level on children in grades 3, 4 and 5. So the simple assessment allows us not only to understand the level of each child, but also to form groups for instruction. The children's groups are made according to level. Anywhere between 3 and 5 groups are made to organize children in grades 3 to 5 by level. Teachers or instructors or volunteers, as the case may be, who have been trained on the approach are allocated to these groups to facilitate easy-to-do activities and to guide the children's work. As children make progress, even within a period of 5 to 7 days, they move from one group to another. periodic assessment is conducted to understand the progress that children are making. Not only do children learn in groups with their peers, they also learn individually. Hence, accordingly, appropriate activities, methods, and materials are designed to suit the different levels of groups organized by learning levels. It is this simple assessment that not only allows us to track children's progress, but also helps us understand the progress that we have made by the end of the intervention. Radhika, do you think we'll be able to see the slides?
I think we're having difficulties. Oh, there we go.
Hi, Ashley. Yeah, so and Devyani, I'm advancing the slides. I'm not sure why you're not able to see them, but Devyani, if you want to keep going, I'll just keep going through them, and then hopefully we can at least have it for the recording.
I think the slides were circulated ahead of time, so many listeners should have it. Devyani, if you want to indicate what slide you're on as you go, and then people can follow along with the slides that have been sent to them.
Okay. Radhika, you can also try and give me access to the screen, as I've done this before, so I should be able to share that. So we are on slide 4, which talks about the key elements of the solution. So what are the key elements of the teaching at the right level solution? The first and foremost, most important step is to identify the problem. What is the problem that we are trying to solve? Here we go. Okay. Here in India, we have been fortunate enough to have the annual status of education report published by Pratham every year, which has been showing us year on year that children's learning outcomes in basic reading and arithmetic continue to remain poor. But at the start of a teaching at the right level, it is very, very important to conduct simple assessment to understand the problem. So if you look very quickly, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. Here is the simple assessment that we conduct. This is the test in Hindi language that helps us to understand children's basic levels. So understanding the problem using a simple basic assessment is a very important first step. The next and naturally next step is setting achievable goals. Here we like to stress upon the importance of achievable goals. Often setting goals that are out of reach, are higher than we could possibly achieve in a short period of time, not only are unrealistic but also demotivate implementers, and we're going to reach that point in a minute. The third point is to set an implementation plan and team structure. And that brings me to the important part of today's webinar, which is what are the different elements of the teaching at the right level solution which focus on mentoring and monitoring. So once we have a team structure in place, there are few steps that contribute to a fruitful mentoring and monitoring structure. The first is capacity building and training of both leaders, which would be your mentors, and instructors. The next is to ensure practice time even for these mentors. The next natural step is to implement the complete approach, including the very important step of assessment through the instructors. The next would be to monitor and continuously support implementation via leaders or mentors to ensure periodic review and assessment of impact, which leads to course correction and future planning. So I'm going to take a few of these elements and talk you through them. Why is capacity building so important? Why do we stress so much on building a team to lead, and how do we do it? Today, Pratham implements the teaching at the right level approach in two key ways. One is directly through Pratham instructors, where naturally we have hand-picked people who are already in line with the mission, in line with the approach, in line with the objectives of the organization, and it's a slightly easier task to motivate and persuade these instructors to carry out teaching at the right level in the appropriate way. But what happens when you're working in partnership with the government? How do you build a team within the government system to lead an approach which is quite different from the way the normal government school system functions? The first important step is that the Pratham team, who has experience in the actual approach in the case of partnership, actually trains the government officials. Here in India, we have officials at the block level, cluster level, so at various geographical units who we train directly ourselves. Now, these are the very people who are going to be the mentors in the program. The next is that these people conduct the intervention themselves. So often in other educational interventions, you hear of the term monitors, inspectors within the school system, who often have had either teaching learning experience many years prior, or maybe not at all. So as part of the teaching at the right level, to ensure that we have appropriate mentoring and monitoring structures, we ensure that these leaders actually practice the approach themselves. It is these leaders then who are going to be the mentors moving forward, who train the government school teachers. Pratham teams only play a supporting role at this stage. So you're already reaching a stage where you're building a structure within the system to carry forward the approach. And then, as expected, the government school teacher teaches students as per the teaching at the right level methodology. So what is the most important part in this entire process of building a team? In our approach, it is the practice classes. What do the practice classes actually do? They help these mentors or monitors or inspectors, however you might call them, actually experience the change that can be created in the classroom themselves. They also understand the challenges that come with implementing the approach and find their own solutions. And most importantly, they have a sense of satisfaction of the change that they have been able to create themselves, which they then take forward with the teachers. So how does this entire approach really work? What are the different elements that go into putting together a mentoring and monitoring framework? The first, and we talked about this earlier, is ensuring that there are teams in place. So multi-stakeholder teams are put in place to support implementation with clear definition of roles and responsibilities. There must be a systematic plan for monitoring. And not only does this include movement plans and mentoring guidelines, but it also includes review schedules and agenda for reviews. So this might seem like really micro level planning, but ensuring that some of these pieces are in place ensures that there is a fruitful mentoring and monitoring framework in place. So if you look on the right side of the screen, you see an example of a review meeting agenda. So what are some of the things that you would like to discuss when you're reviewing a teaching at the right level program? Attendance, assessment. Because there is periodic assessment, are the teachers being able to conduct the assessment? Are they using the data? Are they being guided by it? The key elements of the approach, which is grouping of children, appropriate use of teaching learning materials, demonstration of activities, are these various things being conducted? And what is the progress that we are seeing? So review is very important. But what actually happens inside the classroom? When I, as a mentor, visit a teaching at the right level classroom, it is my responsibility to ensure that the process is participatory and supportive and not detached and inspective. Hence, having the actual experience of conducting classes myself, having faced the challenges myself, I am able to support the teacher or instructor in the classroom as a mentor and not just as a monitor. It is very important to ensure that there is continuous feedback and stocktake mechanisms right up to the highest level of authority. So if it is a program being implemented at the 100 school level, whoever is responsible at the top level of the 100 schools must be aware, must be involved in reviews, and must know what's going on, so that there is ownership at every level. And does this work? Here on the screen, you see an example from the government of Karnataka. And this is my second last slide now, so I'm almost done. The slide shows you the darkest bars are those where the baseline levels were already high, and the lightest is where the baseline levels were low. At the same time, the horizontal graph line shows you the number of visits that were conducted by the mentors in a 60-day program. And each of these visits had agenda items. What am I going to observe each time? What am I going to demonstrate? And here you can see on the left-hand side that those schools which had 6 or more visits had the lowest baselines at the start of the intervention actually saw the maximum improvement in just a 60-day period. and this is data from a government implemented program in a southern state of India. So what are some of the essential elements as we wrap up for ensuring appropriate mentoring and monitoring in teaching at the right level? The first is bottom-up alignment of the program. So everyone, all program stakeholders should be aligned not only in the objectives, but also on the processes that will be used to support the program. The second and very important part that I have stressed on a lot is having first-hand experience for mentors and monitors of actual program implementation. The third is timely data entry and reporting, ensuring that data is available at the school level, at the district level, at the state level to ensure decision making can be easy. The next is setting priorities, so actually using information from visits, from reviews, from data to inform the future decisions on the program. And the last is continuous feedback and review mechanisms, which she talked about, to ensure that whatever mentoring and monitoring structures are in place are actually inputting into program and future planning. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devyani, and that's fantastic. Is it possible to start Ben's presentation now? Great, we'll just wait for the slides to come up. Okay, Ben, do you mind potentially starting? People can go along with the slides that they've got at home, and then the slides should come up shortly.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Is it possible to try and present from my laptop? I'm not seeing that option here, maybe because I'm an attendee rather than a panelist on the chat.
I think only one person has control, unfortunately. But if you could just go ahead and we'll try and sort it out on our side. People have with them, so they should have those slides. But here we go. Okay,
so I'm sharing my screen. I hope that will work. So thanks very much for the opportunity to share with all of you, the Teaching at the Right Level group. We appreciate your work and look forward to learning from you during this webinar. I'm presenting on a program called Tusome, which is here in Kenya, which is a national literacy program implemented in every public primary school. And I work with RTI. We're providing technical support to the ministry on this program. And the focus of this discussion today is on coaching and accountability and evidence, and how the coaching system that's implemented into Tusome here in Kenya is supporting this large-scale national implementation program. So there have been two major literacy programs in Kenya, and just for those of you who worked in research, or those of you who are from JPAL or IPA, we recognize the challenges of going from small scale to large scale, and we're really quite worried after we finished the program called Primer, which was medium scale, so working in 1,300 schools, 250,000 children. It was quite successful, a program impact of around 0.3 to 0.5 standard deviations. We were concerned about how that would work at scale, and I think we were hopeful that the program would be successful, but I think the one thing that we're glad that the ministry insisted that we do was that we work through government systems. So from the outset, we worked through the coaches who were in the structure, they were the trainers, there was nothing really that came from the outside as far as the management structure was concerned. So that said, the scale was still quite daunting. As you can see in the bottom, we were talking around all of the nearly 24,000 schools in the country, supported 6 million children as of the beginning of next year, and 106,000 teachers. So it's a pretty substantial task to be able to work at that scale. And I think the coaching part of it is an essential thing. And this picture is the president of Kenya launching the program, and just a symbol of their decision to really make this program work through their systems and in their personnel that existed. As many of our programs are focused on, this really was trying to make sure the children had the core skills of reading and writing and be able to understand the text that they read. Here are the key steps, the key portions of the program. Children had learner books at a one-to-one level in English and Kiswahili, as well as some supplementary readers. Teachers had teacher's guides that would show them how to teach, and give them some particular lessons or mini lessons that they would teach against the book that the child had in front of them. We had the training programs are really quite focused on behavior change and on actually having the opportunity to do the skills that were essential for program improvement. So there was not much theory, but a lot of modeling and practice before the teachers left the training system. Then we get to the part that's focused of this presentation, which is the classroom support by coaches. In Kenya, every Coach, there's around 1,200 of them, have around 20 schools each, and they're expected to support teachers in those schools, but typically they hadn't been doing that, instead of been focused on administrative tasks. So in Tusome, we really focused on helping, encouraging them to get to the classrooms using a tablet-based tool. So every coach now has a tablet that they use for classroom support. And then that data from the classroom support visit is uploaded to the cloud. And RTI colleagues have worked on this system. It's called Tangerine Tutor, and it's one that I think we're quite proud of. And that data is now being used by government for accountability, not only within this program, but other programs as well. So here are the coaches using tablets. The age of the coaches in Kenya are mostly nearing retirement, so they're not always necessarily that skilled with technology at the beginning, but we wanted to have a system for them that would be easy enough to implement, to be able to have their useful ideas put on the tablets and then uploaded to the system. So just to give you a little picture of what it looks like, on the left side, as they started off a classroom observation lesson, they would have kind of a list of 30 different items. As they're watching the 30-minute lesson, they're filling in how it looks, their feedback to the teacher. And then if you look at the bottom part of the slide, they would click that button and it would toggle back and forth between the observation tool as well as the actual teacher's guide that the teacher themselves were using, so they could actually see what the teacher was seeing as they were teaching. In addition to the observation, which happened for 30 minutes, after every observation, the teacher would randomly assess 3 children. So this is using a quick fluency passage. The tablet would, have them have a term-specific assessment that would allow to just have a quick look at how well those children were doing. 3 children per assessment. After that task, so they would observe a teacher, and they would read with 3 children, the tool would actually suggest to the teacher some areas for feedback. So based on the particular items they filled in this one, in case that they were struggling with a phonemic awareness activity, the tool would then suggest to the coach some discussion points they could have with the teacher. They would just have a couple of them, but really help kind of start off that conversation with the teacher. Also, the tool would embed the feedback from the previous visit into this visit, so that if the teacher is being seen for the second time that month, the tool would keep the feedback from the last round, so you could check in. Last time you were struggling with phonemic awareness, I want to see if you've improved on that, and let's talk through that. The coach would then have that data collected in an offline system on the tablet, and then have this system. If you look here at the bottom, this is actually the button they would click to upload the data. Because many of the contexts where we work don't have very strong internet access, you could upload one bundle at a time. So instead of having the 20 or 30 classroom visits all having to upload once, you could upload 1 or 2 at a time, depending on how much internet access you had at that point. So at the end of the day, we wanted to see how that data could be used to support and help the government manage their system. So this slide shows the national level dashboard of data from these visits, and pretty excitingly, this is from 2017 September, as you can see in the top left. That was Kenya just had 2 elections. I'm not sure if you're following Kenyan politics. In August, they had an election. The Supreme Court annulled the election, and then they did another election in October. So this September was a month right between 2 different elections. So it was quite a complicated month. But yet, if you look at the top row here, the one that says all, that shows us that the coaches saw 21,102 classrooms during that month. And each of the rows below it are the different counties in Kenya. And so a senior government leader at the national level could compare which counties are doing well. Just a quick one, if you look down here, Homa Bay saw 978 visits, which is 109% of their teachers in that month. Another county didn't do as well, Kajiado, only saw 28% of the teachers, 121 visits. And then because you're getting that quick kind of course fluency measure from the students, we have mean fluency rates for English, Kiswahili, Class 1 and Class 2 and Class 3, so you can see which counties are doing better with that kind of pretty coarse measure, but it's kind of aggregated at the national level, and there's room for some comparisons between the counties, primarily on the number of visits they're making. The next slide shows you within a county. So the slide before was at the national level. This is now at a county level, being able to compare which counties had within a county, which zones had the most visits. So these first two rows are two different zones. Chania had 43 visits while Gatamayu had 17. And so a county level leader could then hold to account those coaches who didn't have any visits. You see some of these zones didn't have any. Because the data was GPS tracked, this is the overall map of Kenya from data from September 2017, and you can see the different parts of the country and where the visits were held. So a national leader could hold accountable a county leader to make sure that their coaches are doing visits. This is down clicking in within one county, the Homa Bay that had quite a few visits, and you can click all the way down to an individual visit. This one was done at the 28th of September. Stephen Kariuki visited a Class 1 English subject and at 8:39 in the morning. And so all of those 21,000 visits had the same sort of data, and then we have seen more than 110,000 visits made by Kenyan coaches during the year of 2017. So this is impact data on the overall program, just to give you an idea, comparing baseline, which is 2015, and midline, which is 2016. To make a long story short, the program basically doubled the outcomes across all of the areas. This shows English. Another slide that I didn't include here shows Kiswahili. But basically within 1 year, 2015 to the end of 2016, the children's outcomes across these measures basically doubled. And so we were pretty excited, very excited actually, about the impact on learning outcomes, in no small part because of the coaching. Here, just some overall reflections. This coaching model contributed to a intervention that had a 1 year impact around 0.7 standard deviation. So for those of you who worked on small scale and then moving to scale, basically the impact at scale was larger than it was in the pilot, which we think is largely, or at least in some large part, because of the successful implementation of these coaches who visited classrooms on a continual basis. The third point shows that we are focused on testing in real world conditions. The coaches who are part of the government structure are the ones we worked with. Some of them were good, some of them weren't so good, some of them knew how to use tablets, some didn't, but we were able to see some dramatic improvements of their behavior and outcomes over time. I think the program was successful in no small part because of the testing at the medium scale prior to the national implementation. Next, the tools themselves were quite simple. They weren't asking the coach to do too many things within a 30-minute classroom visit. That way, they're more likely to use the tool on a consistent basis. And the coaching visits were really around teacher change, that we want to focus on a particular set of behaviors and helping the teachers do them and seeing if those behaviors, as they're implemented in classrooms, can improve outcomes, and they really did. And I think what this shows is with a coaching model like this, that's focused, that's simple, that's tablet-based, can actually make a big difference on learning outcomes, even on a national scale. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben. Great. So now we'll move to the final presentation, which is going to be given by Hanno, who's the program director at Fuel. Hanno, I think you're trying to get access to the screen now. Is that right?
So I think the focus of what I wanted to discuss, what I was asked to discuss, is kind of largely around how to create cultures around using data for action, how to strengthen systems. So I'm going to emphasize as I go, I think the nature of the work fitting within a government system, quite specifically. So the fact that it's in a government system, in a bureaucratic system, in sometimes a politicized environment, I think has an influence on how data gets used. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that. So I think that there's some, as I indicated on my slide, some points of departure here is that I think that I will discuss in a moment the nature of the project, but I think there's always a focus to try and find the longest lever when working in a complicated system like this. I mean, like even Ben saying the tools are simple but powerful. It's about finding the long lever that gives you the best possible result. And I think the patience required, as I indicated on the slide, a line that we often go by is don't despise the place of small beginnings. Sometimes you need to be quite humble and patient in where and build momentum over time. So I think that's quite critically important in how we approach the work as well. I'm going to go on to just describing very briefly the context in which we work. So the work that we've been doing has been focused on what in South Africa is called the National School Nutrition Program. Initiative instituted in 1994, it now feeds 9 million kids a hot meal once a day. It's a very expensive program in South African context, and for that reason, the money is quite carefully protected, ring-fenced, etc. It's administered as a part of the Department of Education, although the funding doesn't run directly through the department. But what is critical is that it's implemented at school level, so in the sense that it is the responsibility of a principal at a school to make sure that the children get fed. And they rely on systems that is facilitated through the department. And just to give you a slight insight as well in how this actually plays out, because it's different from how some other countries do it, is in this case, you don't have to engage with the detail of the slide, but basically it results in a meal actually being physically cooked at the school. So stock is held at the school, cooks are located at the schools in kitchens, and they prepare meals freshly every day. In some cases, the schools procure the supplies themselves. In some cases, the supplies get delivered to the schools as part of a centralized procurement arrangement. But at the end of the day, the measure of success, I guess, of the program is that children are fed a meal that has been cooked at the school. And so basically, when FUEL started engaging with the department, we realized that there were officials, Department of Education officials, visiting schools to try and track what was going on, but the metrics they were using were really quite shocking, in that the critical metric that everybody was focusing on was what's the number of learners that were fed. And as I indicated on my slide, that hides a multitude of sins, because it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the meal, the quantity, when it was served, or anything like that. So it was quite a useless metric from a perspective of trying to use that for any kind of action. And so quite early on in the program, we realized that working with the government, we would have to get to a point where what is being tracked is significantly better and more accurate and more useful. And so we ended up with a model, a very, very simple model, which we called monitoring, reporting, and response. And the idea was that we wanted to monitor the right things, get accurate data on it, get creative visibility on that data, and build a system that gets a very rapid response to whatever was monitored. So in our process, a key step was to develop an indicator that could measure performance at the school, to use existing resource. Again, no additional appointments, no extra money pumped into the system. There were people already who had a responsibility to monitor this program. So we invested heavily in those people, and then the data that they were bringing back was firstly an immediate use at the school, but then could also be used up the system to create, to facilitate better decision making around improvement. The indicator we eventually developed was a very simple one that measured three aspects of the program at the school: when did feeding take place, whether the meal was nutritionally balanced, and whether the quantities served was sufficient. A really simple indicator, score out of 100, that could give a school immediate indication of the extent to which they had effectively provided a meal on that day. This, as simple as it seems, was completely revolutionary for a monitor who had historically only gone to the school and said, well, which learners ate, and did you submit your report? So it was just focusing on the actual performance of the program, the actual kind of cold face of it was quite revolutionary in their world. What we saw as we started tracking this is, with virtually no other input than monitoring the right things, we saw dramatic improvement in program performance in most of the provinces in South Africa in which we work. And so what this pointed to critically for us is that the interface between that field worker, that monitor, and the school, which is the implementing agency, that interaction of just engaging around the right metrics and capturing valuable data and using it well drove all of this with virtually no other input into the system. So I want to come to the hub of the nub of the conversation today, and that's a little bit of like, how did we build the culture? Because the operations, I mean, we've all invested in making change happen in different ways in different systems, but I think, how did we get this to stick in a way that it became a culture, that it became complete routine, complete ritual, and that there was meaningful engagement with the data? And so some of these comments might be a little bit generic, but I think firstly, we made sure that we absolutely prioritized buy-in and ownership. And I think there was earlier comments around making sure, you know, that you've got bottom-up alignment, etc. I think we tried wherever we could to co-create processes with government officials to say, to highlight where the expectations we had were closely linked to policy, etc. So this wasn't seen as an outside program or an add-on, but very much in alignment with how they would normally operate. What was critical, this is not about getting them in a room once and getting them excited. It is a constant process of making sure that they see the meaning in what we're asking them to do in the context of their job descriptions, etc. Critical to invest in supportive relationships. So as we were setting up those monitors, those mentors and field workers, it was critical for us, again, given it's a government system, we needed to be low ego, we needed to be patient, we needed to recognize that not everybody's going to move at the same pace, and we needed to find champions because we were thinly spread across this entire system and needed to find people who can message on our behalf. As we developed the metrics, we had to make absolutely sure that they were objective, that they were clear, they were easy to consolidate, and that they were useful to the primary users. What I mean by that last one, and it's quite a critical one, when we talk about monitoring in this sense, very often people immediately say, oh, you're talking monitoring and evaluation. And it's so many times we had to kind of immediately refute that narrative and say, monitoring in this case, monitoring is not done for the purpose of aggregation and eventual evaluation and response. In this case, it was critical to create metrics and to create dynamics around the use of those metrics that were immediately obvious and useful to the user. So a monitor spending time with a principal, that interaction, that conversation at the point of collection of the data and at the immediate engagement with the data, that's where the critical change happens. The change doesn't happen when people 3 levels up make a decision about aggregated data. In our experience, the bulk of the change that we saw in the program happened because people at the bottom of this pyramid, at the immediate point of data collection, could see the meaning in the data and could see the avenues to changing the behavior that would give them improved metrics. We invested heavily in capacitation and support to those mentors. It's similar, I think, to the examples that we were given earlier about the practice classes, etc. There is a lot of investment in making sure that by the time that a monitor engages with a principal, a monitor engages with a school, a mentor or a facilitator, that they are completely confident in what they are discussing and they don't feel exposed in any way. Evolving metrics at different levels, I think, again, came up in earlier conversations. We didn't only build metrics at the level of implementation, but we built metrics all the way up. So we built metrics for how well a field worker, a monitor, is engaging with the school. We built metrics for how well their supervisors are supporting them. to actually apply the methodology at the school. The rituals and routines, we felt and we found it was more important to establish than to have complete accuracy in analysis. Given, again, that we were investing in a government system using existing personnel, so we did not influence their recruitment. We had to work with what we've got, I guess, if you can put it like that. There were significant learning curves for some people. And if I can put it kind of quite bluntly, applying the tool even if you're not doing it perfectly, reporting on your results even if they're not 100% accurate, for us was more important right up front, and through support we could eventually get to to significantly better accuracy, etc. I wanted to point out that in our own team, I mean the team that was facilitating all of this, we made absolutely sure that we built for resilience, because trying to make change in a government system is extremely hard. And lastly, I would say, remember your context. I'll finish very quickly. What I mean by differentiating between political and bureaucratic context is they're very different drivers of behavior. People at higher levels in the system who have to make decisions about adopting this program or not, or supporting it or not, from a political perspective, they need to show that either they've already claimed the win or they can very soon claim the win. They don't want to leave themselves exposed. Whereas bureaucratic drivers of behavior are quite different. They're much more just linked to policy, linked to performance management, etc. And so as you think about how to engage monitors and get them engaged around the data, the messaging that you give either politically or bureaucratically are quite different. So that's the long and the short of it. I would say that we have extended our methodology now from working in the feeding program to in South Africa also engaging in the support given by districts to schools around curriculum coverage, etc. So we're trying to extend our learning into the curriculum and learning environment as well. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very, very much, Hanno. So without wasting too much time, I think it would be good to jump into some of the questions. These are questions that were submitted by listeners beforehand. So the first question is for Ben, and the question is, do you think that there is an ideal teacher-to-mentor ratio?
Thanks for that question, and thanks to both the other presenters. I've learned a lot. I think that depends on context, but as a researcher, we're really interested in trying to understand that. So we actually set up a randomized controlled trial in the Kenya setting between 2013 and 2015, and randomly assigned some coaches to a 10-to-1 ratio and others to a 15-to-1 ratio. And then we were able both to measure the impact on learning of those two ratios as well as compare the costs. And we found, interestingly, that the outcomes were better for the children who were with coaches who had a 10-to-1 ratio. By the way, this is 10-to-1 schools and 15-to-1 schools. Within a school, you would have at least 3 early grade teachers. So somewhere between 30 and 45, I think our numbers say something. Most of our teachers have somewhere in that 40 to 50 range of teachers between grades 1 to 3. So going back to the study, we found that the 10-to-1 ratio was better, but that the additional cost of hiring coaches to get you to the 10-to-1 ratio was not worth the additional benefit. So in Kenya, the national scale-up did not increase the ratio. They decided it was better expenditure to focus on properly implementing at 15-to-1. So I think the key is to try and make sure that you have a rapid turnaround between when the new intervention begins and when the coach can be seen, because our thinking on this is that time frame between when the initial the behavior change process begins and when the teacher is seen by another professional who can give them feedback needs to be as rapid as possible. So I think our research is saying that having a visit around once a month is the ideal. And that more than that would be better, but it depends on the costs and the resources available at each country. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben. The second question is for Devyani. How does mentoring connect with the broader system of mentoring of teachers and teacher support outside of teaching at the right level?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So I think this question is applicable, of course, when we work in partnership with the government. So as I explained in my presentation as well, the actual mentoring and monitoring is carried out by the government cadre themselves. So often these are people who are already in the system with the responsibility of either some amount of monitoring or administrative support, but often this is a cadre put in place just for teaching at the right level as well. But in both cases, it is carried out by the government system itself, which often leads to a potential impact on the general teacher support outside of TRL as well. So what we ensure through the practice classes is that these mentors change their mindset from, tedious administrative tasks, data collection, etc., to actually supporting the teachers and focusing very much on what is happening inside the classroom. So usually that's a pretty big deviation, and if done well, is a practice that is likely to continue even outside of TRL.
Fantastic. Thank you, Devyani. The third question is for Hanno. How can you strengthen feedback loops when monitoring data is strong?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a really good question. And I started out when I wrote the presentation, when I titled it Monitoring for Response. And I think the only way I can anchor it back is to say, the critical secret is to make sure that you don't collect data that you are not absolutely clear on how and who's going to use it. I think especially in the kind of government systems that we work in, they're often permeated by data collection that end up with kind of reports stuffed in a drawer. And I think it's made people kind of skeptical and often, just kind of exhausted by generating information and reports and forms and feedback that just goes absolutely nowhere. I think I think by positioning the metrics, the data you're engaging with, as I said, kind of very practically for the use of the people who are generating that information. That's the first secret. So it's almost like the philosophical approach to say, I'm not going to ask for anything from you that I'm not going to use and that you're not going to get value out of. So it starts in the design, in other words. I think in terms of practical terms, we make sure to circle all the findings back to the schools in the case of the school nutrition program. So schools receive longitudinal views of their own performance over time. They receive views of their performance relative to their peers, etc. So again, our focus is very much around where it gets generated, where it is most powerfully used is the people who are exhibiting that behavior, and so make it practical for them and visible to them.
Great, thank you very much, Hanno. And then another question for Ben. So what role can ICT play in data collection in low resource environments?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think I'm a bit of a Luddite, actually. We were doing a national tablets program, but I'm a bit of a skeptic about how much the technology itself is the driving change. And I want to qualify that statement a little bit, that ICT can work, and it has shown to work, and it's shown to work in rigorous evaluations, but that's particularly when it's driven by a theory of change. So it's not just a device, it's a device that's trying to support a particular behavior change. So I think that this particular model was successful because it was piloted, it was evaluated, it was assessed and refined over time, but also because it's focused on the key behaviors that you want to see those coaches do. And so the coaching system happens to be held on tablets, and it happens to have a dashboard, and it happens to have the dashboard shared for accountability, but all of those factors are related to incentivizing that coach to go visit classrooms, having them see the entire classroom, having them give feedback to teachers, because it's those things, feedback, full classroom visit, and frequency of classroom visit, that we found in the previous research was correlated with learning outcome improvement. So I think ICT is a tool, but I think that a lot of the ICT efforts that I've seen in the parts of the world that I know sometimes are so focused on hardware and what the hardware can do rather than on what the hardware-software combinations and how they can connect to the actual behaviors that we care about and we think are critical for program improvement. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Then another question for Devyani. What are the effective mechanisms for monitoring the performance of volunteers and teachers?
So I think I talked about this a little bit in my presentation, but maybe I can recap a little bit. I think one of the most important elements is ensuring that there is a cadre dedicated to mentoring and monitoring for the program, and it's not an ad hoc activity that is assigned to stakeholders. The second is that there is involvement at all levels. So we've seen that to ensure that mentoring and monitoring is taken seriously, there has to be not only feedback down to the ground level, but also information that is coming out from these visits, from review meetings, etc., actually being pushed up so that positive changes, challenges, etc., are all being communicated through the system, which we've seen helps a lot in actually motivating instructors on the ground. We've obviously talked about the use of data in understanding the assessment, but similar to what the other presenters have been talking about, it is very important to actually keep track of progress of instructors on the ground. So much like the tools that Ben was talking about, we also have we encourage monitors and mentors to keep track of areas where they needed to support particular instructors in a particular visit and make sure that that is carried forward in visits, future visits that they conduct. And the last but not the least is ensuring that there is clear communication. So what we've tried to do in India in a scenario, where there is low access to technology, internet quality is not very good, we have tried various apps and systems, etc., much like what Ben was talking about, but using something as simple as WhatsApp to ensure that there is continuous communication and that there is sort of a relationship being built between the mentor network and the instructor network is something that we've seen as a very effective mechanism of tracking the performance during the intervention as well.
Perfect, thanks Devyani. So I think we have time for one more question. So this question goes to Hanno and it's from one of the lifters, and what they said was that their experience is that often data collection starts off very well but gets worse over time. So how do you motivate for data collection in low resource settings where motivation is low?
Thank you. I really enjoyed this question actually, and I think I'll say we have found that this is very true for some of the environments in which we work. So I think we've tackled it from two different sides. I think you can tackle it from a kind of compliance angle, I guess, from a practical, just make sure that it keeps flowing angle. But I think one thing that we initially underestimated that we learned a lot about is tapping into the monitors, the mentors' sense of mission and leveraging kind of relationships. I think we saw a disproportionate response when we started investing heavily in the quality of the supervisory relationships between monitors, mentors, and their supervisors, and even with the schools. When we started focusing on the quality of the engagement, we actually went as far as to role play and script and what kind of the conversations could look like and how you manifest a supportive relationship. Was an exceedingly powerful way of building motivation around wanting to provide the data. But I think on a slightly more practical level, I think what has served us is to create visibility. So call it, there's no place to hide. So without exposing people, I think it was very easy for them to see their own data flow against their peers. We utilized existing data flow processes within government. So again, in the bureaucratic system, knowing that there are certain obvious routes of data flow, we harnessed some of those. And then we did also build processes for verifying the quality of people's data. So actually sitting down with them and interrogating some of the data and the data sources. And that became a little bit of, call it the stick to the carrot, is knowing that at some point somebody is going to look over my shoulder and actually engage with the quality of what I'm submitting. And it wasn't our first approach, but it has also given us some good results. So a few different angles.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you to all the presenters for making time to present, and thank you for all of you who listened today. And we hope that you'll tune into our next webinar, which is going to be on training, teacher training, and we'll circulate more details on that soon. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.